Romanticism is notoriously difficult to define. It's often described as a literary movement that took place during the Age of Enlightenment, somewhere between 1770 and 1850. But it's not just a period of history, and it's not just about literature. It's also a philosophy, a mentality, an attitude to life. One with profound lessons for today. There are a few key figures in the history of Romanticism and a few key movements. There were the English poets, Wordsworth, Byron, Shelley, Keats, Coleridge, the French revolutionaries, particularly Rousseau and Robespierre, and the German philosophical romantics, Schlegel, Schelling, Tieck, and others. And while they're all different, there are a number of key characteristics that they share, and through which we can piece together a kind of romanticist manifesto. Romanticism is, in some way, part of, and in other ways, a revolt against, the Enlightenment, the movement that criticised authority and put the individual at the centre of political, social, and moral life. It's always difficult to know where to start a genealogy, but it was, as usual, Descartes that is central to changing the idea of thought itself. He changed it from the attitude that truth was revealed externally to us, to the idea that the person, the subject, was at the centre of everything. Without Descartes, the Enlightenment would never have proceeded in the same way, if at all. Descartes leads to Hobbes, Hobbes to Locke, to Rousseau, Voltaire, countless others, and eventually the French Revolution and the modern world. This new way of thinking, of placing the individual front and centre, challenged the dominance of kings, the divine right, the great chain of being, that you were born into your place, the church, the nobility, and it emphasised the inviolability of the human person, of the citizen. Many thinkers of the Enlightenment argued that this inviolability was the product of something important that all humans possessed, something natural, something that makes us all special. We can see this in this important introductory statement to the social contract, published in 1762. Man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. Humans, in a state of nature, Rousseau argued, lived in harmony with each other, in natural freedom. They had two important qualities, the drive for self-preservation and a natural desire to help others. This led to a natural harmony that the modern world had corrupted. Modernity had made men selfish and competitive to the expense of all, and so men were everywhere in chains. Modern society alienated humans from their true selves. Which brings us to the first thing the Romantics shared with each other and with other Enlightenment philosophers: an emphasis on the individual experience. Romantics privileged the experience of human life, praised what each person was possible of, with their own faculties, with their own senses and imaginations. Because this was universal to all, it was sacred, it was inviolable, it had to be respected. The belief in the inviolability of each individual and their thoughts and passions leads to a natural empathy. As Rousseau argued, a pity for each, that itself leads to a humanitarian impulse. Empathy means being able to put yourself in another person's position, and because we all share the same faculties, the same sensations, we could each empathise with each other, could each care for each other. The English Romantic poets all embodied this emphasis on natural man, on individuality corrupted by modern life, on Rousseau's chains and the imagination of the French Revolution. We can see all of this in Samuel Taylor Coleridge's The Dungeon, published in 1798, while the French Revolution was still ongoing. And this place our forefathers made for man, this is the process of our love and wisdom to each poor brother who offends against us, most innocent, perhaps, and what, if guilty? Is this the only cure? Merciful God, each poor and natural outlet shriveled up by ignorance and parching poverty, his energies roll back upon his heart and stagnate and corrupt till changed to poison, they break out on him like a loathsome plague spot. Then we call in our pampered mountebanks, and this is their best cure, uncomforted and friendless solitude, groaning in tears, and savage faces at the clanking hour, seen through the steam and vapours of his dungeon by the lamp's dismal twilight. So he lies circled with evil, till his very soul unmoulds its essence, hopelessly deformed by sights of evermore deformity. So man has been corrupted by modernity, and what's inviolable in each is that he should have been in harmony with nature. The three social contract theorists of the period, Hobbes, Locke and Rousseau, all reflected on the qualities man had in a state of nature, how they lived when there were no institutions affecting them. Hobbes thought that life in a state of nature would be nasty, brutish and short, but as we've seen, Rousseau idealised natural man, the noble savage, as he called it. The English Romantic poets obviously romanticised nature. Their love of places like the Lake District is well known. Philosophically then, there is a universal, transcendent, undeniable line that runs from the natural world through man's senses and into his sentiments. Man feels nature, needs to be at one with it, craves it. Wordsworth wrote in lines written in early spring that, "I heard 1,000 blended notes, while in a groove I sat reclined, in that sweet mood when pleasant thoughts bring sad thoughts to the mind. To her fair works did nature link the human soul that through me ran, and much it grieved my heart to think what man has made of man. Through primrose tufts in that green bower the periwinkle trailed its wreaths, and it's my faith that every flower enjoys the air it breathes. The birds around me hopped and played, their thoughts I cannot measure, but the least motion which they made seemed a thrill of pleasure. The budding twigs spread out their fan to catch the breezy air, and I must think, do all I can, that there was pleasure there. If this belief from heaven be sent, if such be nature's holy plan, have I not reason to lament what man has made of man?" So there's a link between each person's consciousness and nature that's so important that we crave its fullness. It's undeniable. It must be complete within us for us to live a complete life. The Romantics thought that the answer to Wordsworth's question, what man has made of man, was that men were alienated from nature, themselves and one another, and that the cold, calculating reason of the Enlightenment was partly to blame for this. Where many Enlightenment philosophers emphasised reason, the Romantics emphasised feeling. And almost a century before, Lord Shaftesbury, in Characteristics of Men, Manners, Opinions and Times, had criticised Hobbes's social contract, the Leviathan, for arguing that the fundamental principle driving all men was calculated self-interest, or reason. Shaftesbury, and of course later Rousseau, both argued that men had also the important capacity to feel as well as think, to feel joy, sadness and fear, etc., both for oneself and for others. So again, when we're affected by nature, It's through the sensations and sentiments. We feel it before we think about it rationally. Hume had said, for example, that reason could only ever be the slave of the passions, that the passions always preceded it. A literary critic, M.H. Abrams, has written that a work of art is essentially the internal made external, resulting from a creative process operating under the impulse of feeling, and embodying the combined product of the poet's perceptions, thoughts, and feelings. The primary source and subject matter of a poem, therefore, are the attributes and actions of the poet's own mind, or, if aspects of the external world, then these only as they are converted from fact to poetry by the feelings and operations of the poet's mind. Imagination, then, is fundamentally important too. We might think of it as part of the triad of past, present, and future. Nature exists, precedes us, is in some ways in the past. In the present, we, as individuals, feel it and sense it, and through our imaginations we project it and us into the future. How we think about this process determines the future. In the Romantics, we see a line from nature, through the individual and their senses, and into the imagination. Commenting on Wordsworth, R.L. Brett and A.R. Jones write that the material of consciousness is made up, firstly, of sensations, or, as modern philosophers would say, sense data. Secondly, simple ideas which are copies of sensations, or sensations which remain after the objects which caused them have been removed. And thirdly, complex ideas which are compounded of simple ideas. These three stages, as we may call them, correspond roughly to sensation, memory, and thought. Deleuze would call this relationship between the natural world, the human senses, and the imagination a line of immanence. Spinoza would emphasize how we are all, including nature, made up of the same stuff, the same material runs through and affects everything. A pantheism. In This Lime Tree Bower Is My Prison, Coleridge laments on how this relationship is misaligned, but is optimistic about the power of the imagination to correct it. The narrator is forced to stay alone while his friends go for a walk. He writes, "While they are gone, and here must I remain, this lime tree bower my prison. I have lost beauties and feelings, such as would have been most sweet to my remembrance, even when age had dimmed mine eyes to blindness." He imagines his friend's appreciation of nature, and how one of them must cherish it even more because of the corrupting influence of the modern city where he has to live. "My gentle-hearted Charles, for thou hast pined and hungered after nature many a year in the great city pent, winding thy way with sad yet patient soul through evil and pain and strange calamity." In the end, though, the poet's own imagination saves him. "A delight comes sudden to my heart, and I am glad, as I myself were there, nor in this bower, this little lime-tree bower, have I not marked much that has soothed me. Pale beneath the blaze hung the transparent foliage, and I watched some broad and sunny leaf, and loved to see the shadow of the leaf and stem above dappling its sunshine." So we've focused on the English Romantic poets and the French revolutionaries, but the attitudes of both can be clarified if we look briefly to the German Romantics, a group of thinkers, Schelling, Schlegel, Novalis, who, at the end of the 18th century, were part of a period referred to as Furromantik. They too were concerned with the corrupting influence of modern life, which tended to alienate, divide, separate, and estrange people from each other and their own natural condition. The German Romantics were particularly concerned with a dilemma. If Romantics emphasized their own individual feelings, then there can be no theory of what it really means to be a romantic, seeing as everyone differs in their unique perspective on the world. The term then seems useless. How can nature be both transcendental and universal? and particular and unique to each person. They argued that Romanticism was not just an approach to poetry or literature, but an approach to life itself. In The Critical Fragment, poet and philosopher Friedrich Schlegel theorizes how the Romanticist philosophy applies to everything. If the Romantic emphasizes his own personal, sentimental view on what he senses, then why should this not be applied to the family, to politics, to shipbuilding, to cooking? All things can be romanticized. Philosopher Friedrich Baeser puts it this way: for if what the artist creates is also what nature creates through him, then his activity reveals, manifests, or expresses nature itself. It is indeed the self-revelation of nature. Art thus becomes, as Schelling famously argued, the organon and criterion of truth itself. The German Romantics argued that everyone should make their lives into a novel, a beautiful story that fits in with their place in the world and their own imaginative expression of it. Keats wrote, for example, that "I am certain of nothing but the holiness of heart's affection and the truth of imagination. What imagination seizes as beauty must be truth, whether it existed before or not." It's in this way that for the Romantics, beauty, nature, imagination are all directly linked to the revelation of truth about the world. So Romanticism, as a philosophy, is more than just poetry. It's a way of life that emphasizes living with nature, appreciating our senses, sentiments and feelings, and projecting all with a humanitarian impulse into building a better future. In this way, it asserts itself in a certain tone that's meant to be convincing, it's meant to move people. And anything can be written in this tone. Arguments about climate change or poverty might benefit from a certain romanticist prose today. How we describe the world, who writes about it, and in what way has a profound effect on what the world looks like in the future. Academic writing, for example, is notoriously dry, and the dominance of scientific discourse attaches importance to describing the world in a detached way, ignoring our feelings, ignoring our individual position in it. The Romantics, it has been most aptly concluded, took Descartes' dictum, "I think, therefore I am," and reformulated it, "I feel, therefore I am." And while the German Romantics might replace poets here with anyone, Shelley wrote that poets are the hierophants of an unapprehended inspiration, the mirrors of the gigantic shadows which futurity casts upon the present, the words which express what they understand not, the trumpets which sing to battle and feel not what they inspire, the influence which is moved not, but moves.
If you like these videos, I need your help, and here's my request. If you think you get the same value from 4 of these videos as you do from just 1 cup of coffee, then please consider pledging just $1 per video. That's $3 to $4 per month to keep this channel going. You can even limit your pledge to $1 a month, and if you pledge $5, I'll add your name to the credits. To those that already support Then and Now, thank you so much. This channel just wouldn't exist without you. You can also hit like, share, follow me on Twitter and Facebook, etc. All of these things really contribute to helping Then and Now grow. Thanks for watching, and see you next week.